What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Lawyer You Know podcast. And today we are going to be breaking down week one of jury selection and trial number 2 for Karen Reed. And we're going to spend some time on the independent on-site audit of the town of Canton Police Department. Everything that's in there, we're going to answer a ton of your questions, and we're going to talk about how either side may use this, if at all, at trial number 2. And joining me for this episode, as has been requested quite a bit for this specific audit, is my dad, George Tragos. What's up?
Hello.
All right. So we are going to talk about this audit. And to start off, a lot of people just had a question about what is the point of this? Why did they do this? Is this normal? What's the difference between this and an investigation, which we know, or I should say, we think the feds were doing some kind of investigation into this as well. What's the point of this?
The point of an audit is to make things better, is to improve the quality, in this case, law enforcement. You can do an audit of almost anything, any business. It really doesn't matter. So you have policies, you have procedures, and so you're trying to make it better. I think the city council in Canton really wanted to make the police department better. They've taken a lot of criticism, both in social media, and by the defense lawyers and everywhere else. So they wanted to cover their butts, do the audit, and see where they had deficiencies and where they could get better.
And there's some things that they specifically say in here, which is that 5SI, which is the company that did the audits report, does not make any findings of fact or conclusions of law regarding the ongoing criminal investigations or pending legal matters involving the Canton Police Department. So what is that in reference to, do you think?
Well, obviously, they're making sure that this can't be used to hurt them in any kind of criminal investigation. So they're making it clear from the very beginning, look, this was not our intent, so don't use it for that.
And they specifically discuss how they're reviewing the policies of the Canton Police Department. They're seeing how they adhere to those policies and procedures. And basically, this is not a situation where they are going to have some charges against officers for breaking the law. This is not going to be a situation like that. This is not supposed to affect any federal investigation, whether it's ongoing or not. That's not the purpose of this audit.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, look, identify, evaluate, and recommend structural and systemic improvements to the Canton Police Department. So they're limiting themselves, and they're being very careful about what they're limiting themselves to for obvious reasons.
And that's important. And I mean, you have Maureen, Paul, Kim, Julia, tons of people on X. When I made a post saying we were recording this podcast, had questions about how much can the defense use this at trial? If you were a lawyer for any of these cases, what would you use and what wouldn't you use, right? Those are the questions. So that's going to be kind of at the top of our mind as far as we read through what's in this and we discuss what they've done here. How much of this is, if anything, would we use at trial? And just as kind of an overarching thought, this is not something that would ever come in at trial. This is not something that would be an exhibit. Why don't you explain why?
Well, this document wouldn't come in because, number one, it's mostly hearsay. Secondly, it was different. It was done for a different purpose and does not have a court's sanction as an opinion. It is just an individual's opinion, so it doesn't really have any evidentiary value. It's just, it's just like our opinion, your opinion, all the social media opinions. They're no different than the opinion that these people drew.
Right. And they're not going to replace the jury. They're not going to make, even as they said in the beginning, they're not going to make any findings of fact. These are not going to be things that a jury has to listen to. This wouldn't be considered controlling case law or anything like that, that a judge would have to follow. It was done for different purposes under a different scope for different reasons. And so it's not something that you would enter in as an exhibit to say, there's a timeline on here. There's all sorts of factual discussions in the John O'Keefe case. They discuss cameras and interviews and how all this stuff should be done. You can't enter this document to prove that that's how things should have been done. You can't enter this document to prove that this is the timeline of the case. But it doesn't mean that there's nothing from this document that either side can use. We'll probably focus a lot on the defense because there may be information that they didn't have in this document, or if they are going to impeach a witness, or better yet, just refresh someone's recollection. There's always the thing in law school where they say you can refresh somebody's recollection with a pizza box, if they say it refreshes their recollection. So this is definitely something they can use to refresh recollection and things like that. And we'll talk about specifically how it might be used throughout the trial. So we're going to take a look at some of the pages. We're not going to read all of it. It's over 100 pages. We're going to focus on the section that has to do with John O'Keefe, but there's also some other portions of it that I think are interesting. And one of those is just the introduction. The town of Canton, Massachusetts, and the Special Police Audit Committee selected Five Stones Intelligence to conduct an independent police audit of the Canton Police Department in November of 24. So it's important to know that this happened in November of 24 until I think March 30th of 25. Our audit team conducted a thorough review of the scope of work, which detailed areas for reviewing, including crime scene protocols, professional standards, accountability processes, organizational structure, and other operational aspects. This audit included a financial review of overtime expenditures, asset forfeiture expenditures, and police detail finances. Here's a highlighted part. The resident of Canton commissioned the police audit following the tragic death of a town resident, Boston Police Officer John O'Keefe, on January 29, 22. The community seeks to comprehensively assess the department's strengths and identifies areas where improvements can be made. So generally speaking, this audit was done in a response to a lot of the complaints people had about how the John O'Keefe investigation and case went. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and keep in mind again, going back to the judge's ruling on the FBI agent as well about whether the FBI agent could comment on the procedures, and the judge didn't allow that as well.
And it says the audit was conducted from November 18th of 24 to March 30th of 25. I'm going to kind of skip to the bottom of this page. In conducting this audit, we received full cooperation from Chief Helena Rafferty and other members of the police department and town employees. Prior to this audit, no member of the 5SI audit team had ever met any current or former employees of the Canton PD, the Police Audit Committee, or the Select Board. This report was not provided to any member of the department and or town employee prior to April 1st, 25. The audit team provided updates to Robert McCarthy, chairperson on the Police Audit Committee. Also important, another question that came from Twitter from Richard. How independent, in quotes he put, is this audit since they bought and paid for it? What are the guardrails set up going in? So they try to do a very good job of explaining this is independent. This is an audit. We didn't know these people. We had no connections to these people. They did cooperate with us. How independent do you think this actually was?
Well, I think there's two aspects to the paragraph you just read. One is access. Their access was much better than defense counsel for Karen Reed. These people would not have talked to Karen Reed's defense counsel the way they talked to these auditors. So that's important to note. Secondly, the auditors, I got to be honest with you, the auditors are independent. However, I have found that in my experience, most auditors of law enforcement agencies are either former or pro law enforcement. And that's how they know the procedures. That's how they know what law enforcement should or shouldn't do, because they used to be law enforcement. So I really think that it's a pro law enforcement group, but I do think there's an attempt to be independent.
And as we read through this, you guys let us know in the comments of where if this was biased in some way, or if this had a lean one way or the other. Let us know where you think it is by the time we get to the end of the document. Okay. Given the interest in the audit, it is important to understand what is included as part of this audit and what is outside the scope of this audit. So this is really important. What is included first? Well, the assessment of policy compliance with standards of law enforcement accreditation organizations, assessment of the application of policy in recent investigations, aka the John O'Keefe case, assessment of written policy and protocols as applied in recent investigations, presentation of findings and recommendations. So that's what all is included, and we're going to get to a lot of that in this podcast. But what's not included? Well, they didn't reinvestigate any cases or findings of fact, meaning they didn't go back and try to investigate the third-party culprits. They didn't go back and try to figure out if Karen Reed actually did this. That was not something that was included in this audit. Also not included, analysis of evidence collected in ongoing or prior criminal cases, like a hair or DNA or pieces of taillight. They didn't go back and re-examine any of those pieces of evidence or how they were collected. Lastly, rendering any opinion of guilt or innocence of any party. Well, isn't that nice that they didn't take the place of the jury and determine who was actually guilty of these crimes? What did you think when you saw what was included and excluded from the audit?
Exactly what was expected. Again, they're trying to put a we would refer to it as a Chinese wall or a paper mache wall between what they did and the trial that's going on right now of Karen Reed. So they're trying to isolate themselves, and it's exactly what you'd expect.
So what's also interesting to me about this entire process is included in the audit is they talk a lot about policy, protocol, right? That's one of the big deals with this audit. And that's one of the really important parts, and something that I've been hammering on since hearing trial one is how poorly they conducted this investigation based on what we know to be the policies, procedures, and protocols that law enforcement are supposed to abide by and is supposed to follow. And even in this case, they admitted doing things that were not part of their policy and protocol. And we're going to see some of that throughout this document here.
And that's the part that's the most important to the defense, is for them to take a look at the criticism that this document has of policies and procedures.
Okay, let's take a look at some of their observations and findings after they went through the review scope and methodology and evidence and crime scene protocols. First responding officers should have photographed Boston police officer John O'Keefe at the location of where he was found before fire rescue moved him to the rescue. So what's kind of mind-blowing to me about this document, and again, I think it says some stuff that's good for the defense, some stuff that's good for the prosecution. Both sides would probably like to pull one page out here or one page out there and show it to the jury. And then they would really not like other pages pulled and showed to the jury. But this is something that from the jump, so many questions have arisen in this case because of what they didn't do in this investigation. One of which is the photographs of John O'Keefe where he was. Because you've heard people say there was snow under him. There wasn't snow under him. Where was his phone? What time was he probably laying there in the grass? Did it start snowing before or after? How hard was the ground? So many questions about, was there drag marks? Just so many questions about where his body specifically was. And they just didn't photograph the scene before anybody did anything like they should have.
This is a question. Again, we're going through these bullet point by bullet point. This particular bullet point is ripe for cross-examination. They can hit on this all day long. And if any police officer testifies that it was proper policy or protocol for them to move the body, they can ask a lot of cross-examination questions about that. And I think that they can't use the document, but I think the document points them to specific documents that they could use as authoritative to cross-examine that witness if they argue with them about this particular bullet point, which I don't think they will, frankly.
From my perspective, I think they can try to use the document, and it's kind of interesting. What will they call this document, right? I'm interested to figure out what they will, because it's like, oh, you're saying it's not proper procedure to, like, let's say they say, isn't it proper procedure to photograph the body? Shouldn't you have done that? And if they say no, you could say, would it refresh your recollection to review the audit that was done on the Canton Police Department? I don't think they're going to be able to call it that necessarily. There may be some prejudice to that title, but you show them something like this where it says they should have done this. And if it doesn't refresh their recollection, they can say, no, it doesn't refresh my recollection, and you move on. But potentially you can use it for things like that.
And I think you can also ask, have they reviewed the document? Even before you show it to them, you can ask them, have you in fact reviewed this document? And if they say no, then say, okay, do you know what this document is? Are you familiar with it? And then you can say, do you consider this document authoritative? And then you can use it to, quote, refresh their recollection.
Right, unless the judge limits it. But even frankly, they can have no clue what the document is. They could have not read it, but if they still say it might refresh their recollection, you can still show it to them. Now, if they say it's not going to refresh my recollection, I know it's not, then you can say, well, how do you know it's not if you don't know what the document is? You just got to be careful about how much you want to argue with a witness that's on the stand, especially a cop. It could end up looking bad for both of you, which you have to be careful about.
Yeah, but and we learned in evidence, you can show a dead fish to a witness if it refreshes their recollection.
Yeah, so the update by the time I got to Florida State was a pizza box, but yeah, same difference is, anything could potentially refresh somebody's recollection. All right, the next bullet point, all interviews of critical witnesses, including Jennifer McCabe and Carrie Roberts, should have been conducted at Canton PD on January 29, 2022, after John O'Keefe was transported to the hospital, not at anybody's individual house, not while everybody else was around, not months later, they interviewed some of these witnesses. Even years later, they interviewed some of these witnesses. It should have been done on January 29th at the police department. Obviously, duh. And again, a lot of this is at the first trial, a lot of the officers tried to downplay this and be like, no, it's no big deal. Sure, that's how we do things sometimes. So I do think that getting into the police procedures and protocols that they go through in this audit can help the defense set the stage for some cross-examination. It is also really frustrating, as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Easter, I think his name is, the FBI expert that was going to talk about investigations, could have had a heyday with all of these policies and procedures and what Canton PD should have done that they didn't do in John O'Keefe's death investigation. Everyone loves a good lotion, and OneSkin has the best. But guess what? They have a new product, the OS1 Hair Launch. And you may ask, why would a skincare company create a scalp treatment? Well, because the scalp is skin, and just like the rest of your body, it experiences cellular aging. But instead of wrinkles, it messes with your hair follicles and natural growth cycle, leading to hair loss and thinning. OS1 Hair is the first scalp serum powered by OneSkin's OS1 peptide, which targets those aging cells called senescent cells. And it's scientifically proven to help your hair cells do what they're meant to do: grow fuller, denser, healthier hair. Get the root of hair loss and thinning with OS1 Hair. You'll save 15% on your purchase with code LYK at oneskin.co. And we know how important hair is, especially keeping it even as we age, right? Going to be a big goal of mine, I should say. Well, now OneSkin is going to help people with that, which is awesome. This company was founded and led by an all-woman team of skin longevity scientists. OneSkin is redefining the aging process with their proprietary OS01 peptide. Get 15% off with code LYK at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code LYK. So after your purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. So support our show and tell them we sent you. Invest in the health and longevity of your skin and scalp with OneSkin. Your future self will thank you.
Peter, go to the next bullet point, because that's interesting with regards to the FBI. Go to the next one, and I want to bring something up.
Consensual recorded witness interviews should have been conducted.
It is the stated policy of the FBI not to record witness interviews. So, I just want to say these are not universally accepted bullet points. The FBI agent would not have said, because he would have been embarrassed by his own agency if he'd have said that that's the procedure that should be followed, because that's not the procedure the FBI follows.
But one of the things an expert can do is study their procedures and protocols, and he could have said it is their policy. And he could have said their policy is to record, and they broke their own policy. So he could have still said something like that. And then if Hank Brennan wanted to on cross-examination, he could have got up and been like, FBI doesn't record theirs, does he? He'd have to know that, but that would be great fodder for cross-examination for Hank Brennan, because then it's like, listen, it can be their policy, but it doesn't mean they did anything wrong by not recording it. The FBI doesn't even record it. So that could have been an example of some of the back and forth.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Some of these are not home runs, every one of them.
Right. The MSP, along with Canton PD, should have maintained a police presence at 34 Fairview Road pending the secondary search conducted by MSP crime scene units. Yeah, another one that feels like all video footage files maintained on Canton PD's computer system of Karen Reed's Lexus SUV while it was housed at Canton PD from January 29th to February 2nd, 2022 should have been requested and turned over early in the Karen Reed case to lead investigators for any action as deemed appropriate. You know what struck me as wild with this bullet point is the judge didn't even say this should have happened this way, even though it seems very obvious this would have been part of the investigation, important, relevant. To me, this police audit is saying this stuff is obviously relevant. And because it's obviously relevant, it's also, as a lawyer, I can say proper protocols and procedures are the prosecutor should have requested it and turned it over to the defense. Even the cops know that, yet the judge didn't say it, but they said it in this audit, which I found pretty interesting.
Right. And also it's interesting, in a general audit of an agency, you would not see this. This is a line item that is specific to this case. You think about it. I mean, they wouldn't complain about every case and every vehicle being videoed. This is a unique factual situation of this case.
Because the car was the weapon. So it's like the cops are saying that's obviously relevant. But of course, the prosecutor and the judge say, no, it wasn't obviously relevant, which is wild to me. All right, we're going to skip a couple pages when they talk about the internal affairs standards, organizational structure and governance, and some of the findings they found there. And then we're going to get to page 7, which discusses management, operations, and culture. So let's take a look at what this says. The audit team observed Chief Rafferty's leadership style and found her approach and decision-making abilities to be effective. Rafferty is highly respected by the members of the department and colleagues in the law enforcement community. There is a noticeable decrease in morale among department members, largely due to public scrutiny regarding the Canton PD's handling of the crime scene and the investigation into the death of Canton resident and Boston police officer John O'Keefe. While constructive feedback is beneficial, the continuation of personal criticisms has transformed from a method for improvement to personal attacks. These attacks, via various avenues such as social media, phone calls, emails, and public demonstrations, have had a significant negative impact on morale within the department. Social media personalities have claimed that Canton PD deliberately mishandled the crime scene where Mr. O'Keefe was found on January 29th and implied a possible cover-up within the department to hide the circumstances around Mr. O'Keefe's death. Following her arrest, Karen Reed and her legal team have asserted there is a conspiracy and cover-up involving law enforcement and witnesses. Influential figures on social media from various regions have been tracking and amplifying these claims. Multiple Canton PD officers have stated that they have experienced harassment from the public while working, spending personal time with their families and children, and during off-duty police details. A gathering of individuals supporting the Free Karen Reed movement regularly protest outside Canton PD. There have been numerous accounts of officers encountering harassment, both in person and online, including through emails, voicemails, social media platforms, and YouTube. Members of the audit team have received emails and text messages prompting team members to investigate allegations and alleged cover-ups by police. While tensions are strained within the community, it is incumbent upon the leadership of the town of Canton to remain unbiased and objective. Any lack of support from town leadership, coupled with the vitriol expressed by some members of the public, has negatively impacted the morale of the officers. What was your thought when you heard that?
Well, my thought when I heard that. It's inconsistent with some other things. When they go through this, and you'll see it, they keep talking about how high the morale is, yet here they're talking about how low the morale is. So they've kind of have conflicts as they're going through this report. But it's understandable. I mean, but a police officer should be able to take criticism. I mean, that's part of the job. I'm really surprised that they made a comment about the social media aspect of this and comment about the defense lawyers. What defense lawyer doesn't attack law enforcement when they're trying a case? I mean, that's the job of a criminal defense lawyer. So, I mean, are these guys that thin-skinned? I don't understand.
As someone who feels like they sit on both sides of this, right? As a defense lawyer who has attacked some police investigations and also a social media person who talks about this stuff and specifically talks about some of the problems in the investigation, I think it's totally fair criticism if you want to complain about people on social media. I get it. I get a lot of it too. I'll talk about what I think we're doing and why it's different than how they characterize it. But to criticize a defense lawyer for their argument in a case, to me, as an audit, is yet just another problem for Canton PD and this team auditing it. No, you will not shame defense lawyers for fighting for their clients and representing their clients and doing everything they can to make sure their client gets a fair trial. And if they feel like they have proof their client is innocent, they should do everything they can to try and have justice prevail in that manner. So to come at defense lawyers for having some kind of argument or demonstrative evidence that proves something that they believe, it's like, take a walk with that to me. Take a walk with that. You can't stand like this. This is a public document. This is going out to the public. This happened because of the public interest and outrage of what happened in this case. So now you're telling the public like bad defense lawyers challenging cops. It's like, no, dude, you don't have the authority to do that. And you're just kind of making their point for them, where you just want everybody to shut up, sit down and listen to cops. And that's just not going to happen and not how it should be. Number one. Number two, the social media side. I agree with this 100%. You should not be getting harassed and attacked physically and personally. But I disagree 100% with the fact that that's the reason we have this audit. That's the reason we have a lot of this information. That's the reason a lot of this was done, was because of the public outrage of everybody around the country in different regions on social media and in person saying, we are not going to stand for this. We need to do something. You guys need to look into this as leadership of the town, which they did with this audit. And hopefully they do make some of the changes they discuss in here. And that's why we're here. Because if we just been a couple people saying like, this investigation doesn't look great, but no, highlighting, shining in the darkness and in the shadows, bringing it to the light is why we are here, with them admitting problems, and hopefully implementing some changes that will prevent things like this from happening in the future. That's how I see it from the two different sides.
This is an example of what I consider a crack in the audit committee's unbiasedness,
Mm-hmm.
because there are certain, as we go through here, we'll see certain things that exhibit a crack in their unbiased nature. Go down to the observation, and the observation says, right at the bottom of that page, the Canton PD has above average morale as it relates to camaraderie and faith in the department. Yet just before that, they're saying how social media is hurting the morale. However, I don't see a criticism here where they should say law enforcement needs to be able to handle criticism and not have it affect their morale. That's what they should be saying. You get criticized, but that's your job.
And
Buckle up.
in these quotes, no one in this town will care about us till one of us gets killed. Even then, half the town will probably celebrate that. Elected officials don't care about us. Now, the easiest way to gain popularity or get elected is to publicly trash us. They have no political platform, just trash the police. That's it. It doesn't even have to be true. Just do it. And that couldn't be more false. Like, I love cops. Good cops are the backbone of the
Yes.
country. We need them. We have to have them. But like, bad cops shine the light even more about how important good cops are. And bad cops shouldn't get grouped in with good cops for multiple reasons. So to just say it's all or nothing is not true. I'll just speak from my own perspective, okay? There are plenty of cases where I thought the cops did a really good job. Lori Vallow was one of them. Like, the cops put that case together so well. Prosecutors put that case together so well. It's not every cop is a bad cop. It's not every investigation is a bad investigation. But there are bad cops and there are bad investigations. Like, that just is a fact. And when you see it, you need to call it out. Like, that's important. All right, let's jump down to page 9 and 10 here with these recommendations. This section sets forth our recommendations for changes in the department. Recommendation 1, interviews conducted at the Canton PD. Interviews of witnesses should be conducted at the Canton PD whenever possible. These interviews should be recorded and conducted as soon as possible after an event. So this is an important recommendation that the defense lawyers did hit on big time in trial number 1 and wanted to make sure that's true. But you can answer yes to this as a cop and say, well, we couldn't because it was snowing and the PD was closed and we did the best we could. And they'll give a lot of excuses, which is why an investigation expert would have been helpful. Anything to add to that or no?
No,
All right,
I already talked
recommendation
about
2.
the FBI policy on that.
Recommendation 2, all sergeant and patrol vehicles should have full crime scene kits, including evidence collection bags, sealing equipment, and digital cameras. Department phones or digital cameras should be placed in patrol cars for officers to document crime scenes. The audit team identified that officers and detectives use personal phones to photograph crime scenes. Patrol officers and sergeants noted that Canton PD has one digital camera assigned to the detective division. Rafferty is aware of this recommendation and is in the process of purchasing additional digital cameras for officers. So here we go. Crime scene kits, so you can actually collect evidence and not use red Solo cups. That's important. That's great. Now, will they be able to use this at trial? Unlikely. I was waiting for your answer. Unlikely, because this would be a post-remedial measure. So here's why. The recommendations they give in this audit, to me, are all great. The things they need to add, you need more cameras. We need to photograph crime scenes right when we show up. We need to conduct interviews as soon as possible, recorded at the PD. You need to have crime scene evidence collection, bags, and kits in every one of your patrol cars. So while you can't ask the question like, you guys have made this change to make them look bad, this is still a good thing that should be celebrated. We want them to get better. We want them to make improvements. This is some of the things people ask, like, what can we do? Well, you make enough noise where they do an audit and they implement new recommendations, procedures, and protocols that are even better than the ones they didn't follow before. And hopefully they follow them now. So we can't be mad about the recommendations they're making and the changes they're making. We should be happy about that and celebrate that and hope that they do improve in their investigation techniques.
But you can ask the question, did you have available to you collection bags? Did you have available to you digital cameras? You can ask those questions to the officers on the stand.
But what you can't say is, well, now, since this case, you changed your policy and now you're going to have one in every car. You can't do that. That's what I'm saying. You can't talk about the fact that they've now changed policy. It's kind of like, you have a case that is they don't have a wheelchair ramp and they build a wheelchair ramp. It's like, well, now you have a wheelchair ramp, so you admit you should have had it. It's like, no, we want people to make those changes So you're not necessarily allowed to bring them up. There are certain circumstances where you may be able to in criminal cases, but this is not one of them. You can't, talk about their change policy as an admission that they screwed up in the case before.
Although you could ask the question, do you have one now in your car?
Correct.
And then objection. Oh, okay, Judge. I'm sorry. I'll withdraw the question.
Correct. Recommendation 3, rewrite Canton PD policy and procedure related to utilization and authorization of personal phones to photograph or video crime scenes. All policies should be changed to mandate that the utilization of only department issued/owned phones to photograph crime scenes, use of personal phones should be strictly prohibited. To me, there's a lot of undertones throughout this audit. Don't use your personal phone, because then you can have some crossover of some nasty personal text that you have and some other things getting turned over when they're asking for official discussions about cases like we know happened in this case. Recommendation 4, relinquish 911 and dispatch responsibilities to the Holbrook Dispatch Center or hire full-time dispatchers. Recommendation 5, increase training opportunities. Now, this is a big one, and this is one that we were calling for and asking for and begging for more training. These officers need more training. For patrol officers, detectives, and sergeants, specific training of note includes crime scene training. What do you do? How do you block it off? How long should you stay there? You should make sure somebody's doing X, Y, and Z. People aren't doing this. Random people aren't showing up with search parties, that you actually know who these people are. Interrogation and witness interviews. Yeah. Do you do it with your buddies around? Do you do it with their husband around, who's also a cop? Do you do it at their house? Do you do it at the Canton PD? They need to be trained. And evidence, documentation, and practices, chain of custody, maybe, right? Where do you save the videos? Like, all of that is so important. And they're changing some of them and updating and making better some of these procedures and protocols. But guess what? We also need to make sure they continue to be trained on it. Chief of Investigation Division should review all death investigation police reports to ensure completeness, accuracy, and exhaustion of all investigative avenues. It's another one. Make sure we're doing the full investigation. Recommendation 7, provide prompt, proportional, and consistent discipline across the department. Discipline must be applied consistently to all employees and administered in a manner that prevents the appearance of undue favor to any employee. The audit team identified that several internal affairs cases were handled directly by the chief of police, and instances where the discipline process was not always applied consistently. That's problematic. Anything else you have to add on any of those?
No, except your comment there was interesting, because they, a couple pages before, praised how great the chief was and how everybody really liked the chief. And, and yet she was criticized for the way she conducted her discipline.
They also talk more about these recommendations of adding digital cameras and different things to each of the cars, and how maybe they'll do some surprise audits potentially. So again, they're really trying to get them to have better procedures and to actually follow the procedures they have, right? It's twofold. Improve the procedures and policies, but also make sure you're actually following the ones you have. More recommendations on page 25 here. Training on testimony clarity, handling disagreements professionally. Oh, okay, this is what I want to say here. So this on the screen is just talking about kind of how you testify and train law enforcement officers on how to testify, how to deal with disagreements with counsel, identifying assumed truths, exposure to high-profile cases, continue your skill development. So they are going to give them more training and classes on testifying. And I wanted to highlight this page specifically because when you talk about the difference between a lay person who's just a fact witness who gets up there and tells you what they saw, and a law enforcement officer, is considerably different. Lay witnesses don't get prepared or taught how to testify. Cops do. This is proof of it. And these are some of the things that they're going to get trained on.
There's also an issue of budget. I think that this audit doesn't take into account how much these recommendations cost. And the city council is going to have to take these recommendations, whether they're good or bad, and is going to have to decide whether they want to spend the money on the training that all of this, like for instance, the witness training they're really talking about here is how to testify. That's going to cost money. The FBI does a great job. I mean, FBI agents are great witnesses, but they spend a lot of money and a lot of time training an FBI agent how to testify.
Well, a lot of times FBI agents too are lawyers. But
Yes.
also, so one of the ways to do this, like we've done this things like this before is like local prosecutors or defense attorneys will actually help. Like I have a couple of friends that are officers that I've gone through a lot of this stuff and help them with how they testify. So I have no beef with this. I think it's a good thing. I think they should be taught how to testify. I just want people to understand the difference, that it's not apples to apples when a cop testifies and just a lay witness testifies. So it's like, oh, the cop seems more believable because of XYZ. It's like the other guy's not a professional witness. He's just showing up and telling you what he said. Not to say either of them couldn't lie. It's just identifying issues. Okay. They talk about mental health improvement. There's a ton of stuff in here, just like an absolute ton of stuff in here. How to handle juveniles, community relations. We don't have time to obviously talk about all this. So what I am going to jump down to, they also talk about the Sandra Birchmore case specifically, which we're not going to have time to get to, but I do want to focus on, they do talk about body worn cameras are securely uploaded into cloud storage, location managed by the vendor Motorola. It's like talking about how to store video, obviously important because of this case. But let's jump down to specifically when they start talking about the John O'Keefe case. And we're going to read through most of this to see what they had to say about the John O'Keefe case. And again, Dad, with your hat on of how could you use this if you were the defense attorney in this case. As requested by the Canton Police Audit Committee and Canton Town residents, the audit team reviewed the internal police response, crime scene investigation actions, police reports, evidence collection, and evidence documentation to ensure policy and procedures were followed by Canton PD surrounding the death investigation of Boston police officer John O'Keefe. And they start out with a timeline. 5:04 a.m. Canton PD receives a call on January 29th. Carrie Roberts called, reported O'Keefe had not returned home. 6:04, 911 call. There was a guy unresponsive in the snow at 34 Fairview. Miss McCabe identified the male as John O'Keefe. McCabe's call was passed over to Canton Fire Rescue. Sergeant Good dispatches Officer Saraf and Mullany. Sergeant Good notifies Sergeant Lank and Gallagher. 6:09, Canton PD Officer Saraf arrives at 34 Fairview, observed McCabe, Reed, and Roberts, who were over the body of O'Keefe performing CPR. They reported he was not breathing. Saraf noted O'Keefe was bleeding and his skin was cold to the touch. Moments later, Canton Fire responded and took over the first aid response. Officer Saraf reported Karen Reed was distraught, could not tell him what happened. 6:12, Canton PD Mullany arrived and observed female conducting CPR. Reported he arrived in concert with fire rescue personnel, assisted them with placing John O'Keefe in the rescue. Mullany reported Reed was hysterical and made statements, "Is he dead?" and "That's my boyfriend." Mullany reported that Sergeant Good told Ms. Roberts to take Miss Reed home. Mullany reported Reed's father called Canton PD, reported Reed was suicidal, and Sergeant Good ordered Roberts to return to the scene with Reed. Reed was then recommended for medical evaluation, Section 12, and transported to Good Samaritan Hospital. 6:12, Canton Fire Department and Emergency Services arrived. 6:14, Sergeant Good arrived at the scene and noted O'Keefe was in the ambulance with paramedics. McCabe, Reed, and Roberts were standing outside. Good reported he asked Miss Reed how she arrived, and she stated, "I don't know." Sergeant Good reported that Miss Reed was yelling and acting hysterical, stating, "Is he dead?" And they asked Miss Reed if she drove to 34 Fairview last night. She replied, "I think so. I can't remember." Reed and McCabe were placed in the back seat of the patrol car. On scene, McCabe provided Good with a timeline of events. Good reported he interviewed Ms. Roberts on scene and she gave him a timeline of events. Canton PD Detective Lank arrived on scene and took command. Lank noted that Ms. Reed was hysterical in attempts to obtain a statement. It was unsuccessful. According to the officers on the scene, Reed mentioned she did not remember being at 34 Fairview. 6:38 a.m., Lank contacted MSP CPAC unit and brief summary. Lank received a return call from Proctor, who was briefed on the situation. Canton PD officers were at the scene. They reported they heard Miss Reed make statements such as, "Is he going to die? Is he dead?" Sergeant Lank noted Good advised that Mr. O'Keefe had been bleeding from his nose and mouth and swelling around his eyes. Sergeant Lank took a statement from Jennifer McCabe, who provided a timeline of the events. After taking the statement of McCabe, Lank reported he contacted the owners of 34 Fairview, Brian and Nicole Albert, who provided statements. Lank was contacted at Canton PD by Miss McCabe, and again, now that was at 6:38 and then at 9 a.m. Lank was contacted by Canton PD by Miss McCabe, who requested Lank return to 34 Fairview. Lank and Paul Gallagher responded and spoke to McCabe, who advised that Miss McCabe, Roberts, and Reed were driving around looking for John. Reed stated something to the effect, "I hope I didn't hit him," and believed Miss Reed made these statements on scene in the presence of a police officer. Interesting that that's the first time that they note that anything like that was said. Then approximately 6:24 a.m. Are we going the same day, just backwards? I can't really tell. Canton Fire Rescue reported or transported O'Keefe to the hospital. Yeah, that's back in time from the 9 a.m. They transported Reed to the hospital for evaluation as well. O'Keefe was declared dead at 7:50 a.m. Then they show some pictures of what 34 Fairview looked like that night. You can see that where they took a picture after John O'Keefe's body was moved, you can see the actual ground. Now, did the snow melt with him laying on it? Was he laying on the ground before the snow started to pile up? There's all sorts of questions about that. They took pictures of the blood in the snow. You had some comments you want to make about the timeline.
Well, the only thing I want to say is whenever the report like this is done, it gives the defense lawyer an opportunity to take a look and see if he got everything and for him to compare what he has to their timeline. If there is something in their timeline he doesn't have, then there's something missing. He didn't get it in discovery, and he can file a motion to get it in discovery because they had better access than the defense lawyer did to the documents and the timeline of the police department. So that timeline may reveal something that the defense didn't know, and that's important, and the defense needs to go through that carefully.
And then there's a highlight photo where, because you highlighted this photo.
Yeah, I just thought that was interesting that they that they used a leaf blower. I mean,
yeah, photo taken.
just to me, I just thought that was a hoot.
For the people not watching, I just want to read what it says. Photo taken on January 29th, 2022 at 34 Fairview Road, Canton PD crime scene search using a leaf blower. And they describe in the document that due to the heavy snow and winds, detectives utilized a leaf blower to identify evidence. What are your thoughts when you hear that they used a leaf blower to identify evidence in this case?
I mean, that's like taking a shovel and throwing it around. You know, that's going to destroy evidence. It's going to blow it away. It's going to move its location. I mean, a leaf blower is not the way to look for it. What you do is you carefully take a brush and you brush the layers of snow off one layer at a time to see what's underneath it. Again, you'd never see, for instance, a lot of us have taken a look at archaeological sites where they're going in there and they're taking a look and they're looking for little pieces of pottery and those kind of things. They don't use a leaf blower to blow away the dirt on top of the pottery. You see them with these little delicate brushes brushing away the top layer of dirt. That's what they should be doing here. That just is, to me, that's just I just thought that was hilarious.
Especially with hindsight being 2020, and we know they found all these little pieces of plastic later. Like a leaf blower would blow that plastic all over the place. Like that would just be a major problem. There were some questions on Twitter as well. Why didn't they mention the leaf blower? Why didn't they mention the red Solo cups? Well, they did. And I also wanted to highlight it here. So they talk about the leaf blower. Then they also say they searched the area and discovered broken drinking glass, small amounts of blood. Canton PD detectives reported that they only searched the area around where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found and would not have encompassed the entire yard. So that's an admission of a failure. What they're trying to do is explain why more taillight pieces were found later. But in reality, you have to do that night.
Yeah. And they didn't secure the crime scene. Remember, they didn't secure it.
At all. Canton PD detectives secured the blood evidence in red Solo cups and placed them in a Stop and Shop grocery bag. The drinking glass was secured in an evidence bag. What?
High tech.
Yeah, I mean, this is the type of stuff that's horrible. Like, this is embarrassing. This is how I'm wondering how Hank Brennan is going to deal with this investigation and this evidence collection. Because as a criminal defense attorney, he would eviscerate this investigation and the way that they collected evidence and handled the crime scene in this case. So how is he going to promote it as an investigation that was good enough to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt? That's one of the things I'm most looking forward to in this trial.
I could predict, just like Proctor, I can predict that he's going to own it. What he's going to do is just say, look, there's nothing I can do about it. That's what they did, but it doesn't make any difference. Yeah, he's not going to deny that these things happen and they're wrong.
He can't. But what he's going to say is we still got enough evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt. Right. That's what he's going to have to say. Cocktail glass was turned over to MSP. Detectives said the blood evidence was secured in a refrigerator. I like if you noticed, a lot of the other things they're stating as facts, but they said the detectives said the blood evidence was secured in a refrigerator in the evidence/property room. MSP Cryblack technicians took custody of the evidence on February 1st. Thomas Kelleher, Canton PD Deputy Chief of the Investigation Division, who resided across the street from 34 Fairview, isn't that convenient, provided the red Solo cups to detectives. That was nice of him. He recused himself from the investigation because he knew the Albert family, obviously his neighbor. Let's see what else. Anything else important here? So more reports of Ms. Reed saying, "I hope I didn't hit him." Then they have pictures of the Ring doorbell camera from John O'Keefe's house. Miss Reed getting there, getting out of the car. Approximately 8:23 a.m., Cam PD responded to O'Keefe's residence, One Meadow Lane. Miss Reed's Lexus is pictured parked in the driveway after leaving the hospital. On February 2nd, Miss Reed was arrested by MSP. Attorneys for Miss Reed claimed that Mr. O'Keefe was assaulted and his body was later placed outside of 34 Fairview, Canton, Mass, as part of an alleged cover-up by law enforcement. And they have a note here. Note, our team has not discovered any information that would indicate any actions by Canton PD, officers, or detectives were a part of a conspiracy to frame any individual for the death of John O'Keefe, which is incredibly interesting since they said that's exactly what they're not going to do at the beginning of the document.
Okay. So again, remember I said earlier that there was a crack in the audit's unbiased nature before when they mentioned, here's crack number two. It is obvious here that they do have some type of agenda because there is no reason for there is no reason in a policy document for them to make these two statements about the attorneys and then to draw a conclusion. And that's why this report can't come in, because you've got these stupid conclusions that they draw where they're, again, like you said, they specifically say they are not going to get into this. So why are they?
In a situation where they would be afraid that somebody would say, well, they didn't say it didn't happen, so it must mean that they do believe in the conspiracy. It's like they very clearly set out, we're not going to do this, guys. We're just an unbiased auditor. We're not going to talk about whether there's a conspiracy. We're not going to talk about investigating any other parties. That's not what we're here to do. We're looking at policies, procedures, and protocols. What does this have to do with any policies, procedures, or protocols? Nothing.
And they say we're not going to talk about guilt or innocence.
Right.
This might as well say she's guilty.
Right.
Because if the defense theory doesn't hold water, then obviously she's guilty, and that's what they're saying.
And that's why this isn't just some document the defense is begging to enter into evidence and hoping that the jury sees. Because if the jury does believe this is an unbiased audit, there's more bad, I would say, than good in here for the defense. Most of what's good in here for the defense already knew about, already is going to be able to hammer in cross-examination. The only thing it adds is potentially something to refresh their recollection, or maybe they learned something more about MSPs and Canton's police protocols and procedures that they might be able to use as an authority to force these officers to agree with what the policy and procedure and what they should have done is and how they did not follow that. All right, next they get into the videos of the Lexus and how it was at the garage with the videos captured. There's a note that says MSP crime scene technicians searched and processed the vehicle on February 1st. Canton PD acknowledged and the town of Canton has confirmed that one camera in the Sally Port records abnormally in a mirrored fashion. 3 cameras in the town of Canton have been found to have had this issue, and this camera malfunction is not isolated to only the Canton PD cameras. Yet another scenario where they are fighting for the Commonwealth, agreeing that what they said is true, and how no way that this could have been any wrongdoing on anybody. And I'm not saying there is. I'm just saying we don't know. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, oh, yeah, no harm, no foul. This thing was completely inverted.
Let me just say, I have probably reviewed tens of thousands of hours of video and cameras. I have never had a camera that had an automatic mirror fashion record. Never. And I've never seen it. I've never heard about it. This is the first time I've ever heard about it. And not only does it happen once in Canton, but it happens 3 other times in Canton. And did these auditors go around trying to find cameras in Canton? Was that their job? So this is just an absurd, again, another crack in their armor. I think that the auditors were exposing themselves to claims of bias and prejudice here as well.
It's like they literally went out to try and prove that what the Commonwealth said was true and to try to prove that they didn't do anything wrong with it. And that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. But like, We've reviewed cameras that have been blurry, right? And they don't get good picture or don't have like the night vision. So if it's at night, you can't see something. We've seen cameras that are motion activated. That was another thing that happened in this case. We've seen cameras that have been cut off at random times or just stopped working. But you're right, never just inverted for no reason, just on their own
Never,
doing that. It's
never.
crazy.
And I've never seen it in the literature as well. I can say.
Yeah. And they talk more about the cameras and the videos and how it should have been turned over. Okay, then we get to the secondary search of 34 Fairview. The audit team learned from Canton PD that on January 29th, approximately 5:45 p.m., MSP Special Emergency Response Team, or CERT, conducted a second search of 34 Fairview. During that search, pieces of a red plastic taillight were recovered in addition to a Nike shoe. Over the next several days, as snow melted, numerous taillight pieces were recovered at 34 Fairview Road by investigators informally as they traversed the area. How about that? Informally. So they just happened to be walking by or driving by on their coffee break, and they're like, oh, there's a piece of taillight that all these other investigators and special agents that are supposed to come here and search for this stuff, they must have missed. And they just say it like it's no problem, right? That's problematic to me. Where was I? Approximately 45 pieces in total were discovered. Conditions at the scene of the search were less than ideal. Significant snowfall had accumulated with the center of the street being plowed, pushing snow to the side of the road. The snowstorm accumulated at least 20 inches of snow in Canton, Mass. So again, making excuses for the poor investigation. Here's my thought. I don't care how bad, and I'll ask you, this would be a question I ask you, right? If you're a prosecutor or, running a law enforcement agency, no matter how bad the conditions are you ever using red Solo cups, leaf blowers, stop and shop bags, and leaving without securing the crime scene or searching the crime scene?
Many of your viewers may remember the Keystone Cops. It was a comedy uh, series. I think it was before talkies. I think it was a silent movie even. But I mean, this is an absurd law enforcement agency. They don't have any of this. Do they not have crime in Canton? Is there ever any crime? Does anybody ever shoot anybody? Has everybody beat anybody up? Is there ever a theft? I mean, does nothing happen in Canton where they have to have crime evidence kits, and not just that, but interestingly, that the deputy chief runs across the street with red Solo cups. I mean, here's a guy, he's the deputy chief. He should be able to pick up the phone and say, bring the evidence kits. And the evidence kits should be there like that. The deputy chief called and said, bring the evidence kits. But no, he gives them red Solo cups. It makes no sense to me. I don't understand. These guys, this audit is definitely something that needed to be done. I don't necessarily think it was even critical. I don't think it was critical enough.
But I mean, at least they did it, and hopefully they do make improvements.
Yeah.
Yeah, this stuff is so far outside the norm that it's just wild to think they're even trying to make excuses for it. And
Right.
by the way, they mention Kenny Berkowitz. That I think is the police chief who was maybe not handing down discipline appropriately. That was the prior police chief. I meant to mention that when we talked about Rafferty. But on February 4th at 8:50, Canton Police Chief Kenny Berkowitz summoned Sergeant Lang to 34 Fairview to retrieve pieces of what he believed to be part of the red plastic taillight near where John O'Keefe was discovered. Lang, along with Canton PD detectives, responded to 34 Fairview and maintained a presence and took photos until Massachusetts State Police Trooper Yuri Buchanan responded and took custody of the evidence. Observation and findings. Canton PD detectives did not have access to evidence collection kits in Canton PD vehicles or at the Canton PD headquarters. So how did they gather evidence prior to this?
I mean,
I don't
think
get
about
it.
that. Even the headquarters didn't have them, so they didn't even have them. How is this possible? They function now. I understand that they use the state police
Right.
for big cases, and that's not uncommon. A lot of small agencies depend on the larger agencies for this kind
But
of
why
thing.
didn't they call them?
But it just doesn't make any sense that they don't have any of these kits just sitting in the headquarters. I mean, come on.
I mean, now it kind
It
of makes
just
sense. There are messages about John O'Keefe not wanting Karen Reed to drive home and just to stay with him because the snow was going to be so bad. Because, like, they don't even do their jobs if it snows. I mean, it's a lot of snow. I'm from Florida. Like, 1 inch of snow would be crazy. I wouldn't go out of the house. I wouldn't drive. So 20 inches, I get it. I'm not saying they're like wusses for are not going out, but things happen and they have vehicles that can deal with this stuff, I would think.
I hate to kind of bring this up, but there's a Seinfeld episode,
Okay.
and one of the Seinfeld regulars is a postman. And so one of the Seinfeld guys is walking by and he sees the postman in his apartment. And he goes, "What are you doing there?" And he goes, I'm not working today." And he goes, "Why?" "It's raining." The guy goes, "Excuse me, but isn't there a thing about rain and postmen and stuff?" I mean,
Yeah.
come on.
Because this is literally life and death stuff. I mean, it's really crazy that this isn't something that's taken into account. And whatever. Canton PD detectives stated they only utilized solo cups as a last resort to preserve the forensic evidence until it was transferred to the MSP crime scene forensic unit. So they have no other way available to them, is what it sounded like. That would have to be the answer when they say last resort. They couldn't have called anybody. Nobody could have brought an evidence kit. They couldn't have gone to the store and bought something sterile. There's just nothing you could have done, period, the end. At any point, you had to just use red solo cups. The audit team found that Canton PD did not follow policy and procedures related to evidence collection and preservation. Yeah, but you just made excuses for them, right? So it's like they're saying they didn't follow policy and procedures, but they're basically saying, well, conditions weren't great and they didn't have the collection kits in their car. So what were they really supposed to do? The audit team found that there were no Bureau of Criminal Identification units initially on scene, nor were crime scene kits available or used for evidence collection. It's wild to think they even had a budget, right? Like taxpayer dollars are going to this police department and they don't even have the things necessary to investigate a crime. To me, it's like, why are they even showing up? Why don't you just have MSP show up to this? Why did Canton PD even show up? Send the ambulance and fire and rescue for them to, be able to help the person on the ground unresponsive, but you can't even do an investigation.
There should
right?
be a policy that they can't do anything but issue traffic tickets. That if
If
anything
they're not
comes up
equipped,
besides a traffic ticket, call MSP.
yeah, because they're not equipped to handle it. Like
Yeah.
they're just not. And that's sad. It's so sad to think of all the lives that were affected by this because of how ill-equipped they were to handle this investigation. No photographs were taken of John O'Keefe in the exact location of where his body was found.
Did you read that note, Peter? Peter, did you read that note according to the Massachusetts Crime Lab? Maybe
Nope.
I missed that.
All right. Note, according to the Massachusetts Crime Lab, plastic is not recommended for packaging or storing moist or wet evidence items due to the acceleration of the decomposition of biological materials in or on the evidence.
I thought that was important.
And it's like, duh. So it's like, thank you for the note that you shouldn't use red solo cups. But it's like they're just showing exactly how bad it was, right?
Yeah.
This is how
And
bad
all
it
the
is what
evidence-
you chose to use.
And all the evidence had snow on it. So, I mean, never mind.
It's crazy. Can PD use personal phones to photograph the evidence? A digital camera or laptop should have been used to photograph the evidence. I'm using a laptop might be kind of difficult, maybe an iPad. Canton PD first officer on the scene should have photographed John O'Keefe where he found him. Jennifer McCabe and Carrie Roberts should have been interviewed, and the interviews should have been recorded at Canton PD after O'Keefe was taken to the hospital. Both witnesses accompanied Miss Reed and drove Miss Reed to 34 Fairview. Nicole and Brian Albert should have been interviewed at Canton PD. Both MSP and Canton PD failed to maintain police presence at 34 Fairview Road to maintain the integrity of the crime scene. Both agencies should have coordinated to have an office maintain a presence at 34 Fairview Road pending the second search by MSP. The audit team found there was incomplete coordination requesting all video files in custody to Canton PD regarding the Canton PD Sally Port. It's like, yeah, Proctor got a bunch and then stuck them in his file. All video footage files maintained on Canton PD's computer system of Karen Reed's Lexus SUV while it was housed at Canton PD from January 29th to February 2nd should have been requested and turned over early in the case. Due to the blizzard on the morning of January 29th and the coordination of personnel, MSP waited until 4:45 p.m. to begin coordinating the secondary search of the crime scene. Each piece of evidence should have been carefully logged and tracked to establish a timeline of its handling. Officers should refrain from using personally owned cell phones to video or photograph crime scenes. Once evidence is processed, it should be stored in a secure and controlled environment, such as an evidence room with restricted access. If there is any doubt about the legal requirements, it is essential to consult the department's legal advisors to ensure the integrity of the investigation. Every way you could have messed up this crime scene investigation and evidence gathering, it feels like they did. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. And now the
I'm just
last,
looking at these recommendations again.
yeah, let's get to the corrective action here, which is the last page we're going to read from this audit. On October 31st, 2023, Chief Rafferty updated the Canton PD policy and procedure related to evidence collection and preservation. That's great. She's updating the policy. They need to change it, and she needs to make sure that they handle it, and it'll solve a lot of their problems going forward. Reference is made to Canton PD Order number 6.01. The new policy includes protocols including handling crime scenes in inclement weather. Well, I'm glad they have that now, and it's as crazy as it is to think they didn't have it before in Boston, Massachusetts, where it snows all the time. Let's not complain because at least they have it now. Okay? Let's not complain that they changed it, I should say. We can still complain that they didn't have it at the time. The new policy and procedure regarding evidence collection and preservation are consistent with the CALEA standards and best practices. The audit team verified that the department purchased crime scene kits that are now available for crime scene collection for all Canton PD officers. So I guess they found the room in the budget. Audit team discovered that Canton PD has only one digital camera, which is assigned to the detective division. Note, Rafferty advised she's in the process of purchasing new digital cameras. The audit team recommended that officers should receive crime scene training, which Rafferty confirmed she supports. In February of 25, Rafferty, in coordination with the information technology specialist, purchased 5 phones for utilization for the detective division. All good things. More training, more tools, more kits, more cameras. All of that is important to, here's what I'm saying. A lot of the things they screwed up here, evidence gathering. They didn't take pictures when they should have. Training on how to handle a crime scene and how to secure it. They're putting things in place to hit those individual problems head on. So kudos to them. I hope they do it. I'm happy that they're doing this at this point. It's too late. It's not too late. It's better late than never, I guess. That's what it feels like to me. The audit, this is the conclusion. The audit team found no evidence supporting claims that any Canton PD officers tampered with evidence located at 34 Fairview Road crime scene. Again, they had to mention that. The audit team further found that only Canton PD officers that should have been recused from the police investigation were Detective Kevin Albert and Deputy Chief Keller. I don't know how you say that name. So again, they even went a step further to say that nobody else needed to recuse themselves, which I find pretty interesting, especially because the defense had a heyday with Sergeant Lank and Trooper Proctor and so many people with connections in this case. Canton PD has full investigative authority to work in concert with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office and Massachusetts State Police on death investigations, even though admittedly so they were ill-equipped to handle them. Based on interviews and review of investigative reports, the audit team determined that Canton PD, as first responders, worked on the initial crime scene and conducted initial interviews of some witnesses at the scene. The audit team did find policy and procedure failures related to crime scene processing. The audit team has determined that Canton PD's internal controls and compliance oversight have improved since the initiation of this audit and that effective leadership is in place to supervise future critical incidents. The audit team has advised Chief Rafferty regarding our recommendations, and Chief Rafferty has confirmed the implementation of new crime scene procedures. All right. So after hearing the conclusion, all the recommendations, all their findings, what are your overall thoughts of this audit?
When they avoided talking about the case and trying to defend the police department and trying to make the prosecution better against Karen Reed, when they avoided those things, I think their general policy recommendations were good. They were right. They were correct. But I got to be honest with you, I could have done this. Come on. Anybody could see you don't use red Solo cups, that you don't move the body before pictures, that you secure the crime scene. Anybody could have done these recommendations because these are so obvious that there's such a failure at the Canton Police Department that these were all very obvious changes that needed to be made.
Well, it's funny.
Who would not say maybe you should have at least one evidence kit? What do you guys think? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and what's funny about that is maybe you just confirmed that Judge Canoni was right. They don't need an expert because anybody could see just how bad this investigation was. That's almost what I felt like her order said. This is so bad.
Yeah, maybe
Any
you're right.
layperson can see. You don't use, it's not like they had some technical failure. And that's kind of what she said is like when you're talking about bullet fragments or, what's put on a bullet when it goes through the chamber or whatever, it's like, yeah, you might need an expert for that. But this stuff is so obvious that you don't use red Solo cup. So that is kind of funny the way you just explained it. Maybe she was right. Maybe we stand
Yeah.
corrected on that. All right, let's talk about jury selection real quick. We both thought jury selection was going to take even longer this trial than last one. It took about 2 weeks last time. 3 days into jury selection, they already have 10 jurors seated, which is kind of wild to me. They're trying to get 16 total. I believe they have 16 peremptory challenges. It's 12 jurors, 4 alternates. Are you surprised at how quickly they're getting a jury?
How long did it take last time?
About 2 weeks, I think.
All right. Last time at this point, they had 12 jurors.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Uh, yeah, they had 12 jurors at this point. So we
Wait,
have
hold
now
on, hold on,
10.
hold on. Hold on. Do you mean at the end of today, like Friday or yesterday?
Well, when they had the 10, they had 12. So I don't know what you're
Oh,
talking.
okay.
I didn't.
Somebody compared it. Okay, sorry. Okay.
Right.
Got it.
Okay. When they had the 10 jurors at that point, they had 12 at the old trial, the
Okay.
prior trial. All right. So they're a little behind that. Um, However, they have done some things that really have streamlined this selection. I think the questionnaires obviously have streamlined it.
And they're
The
better.
percentage, excuse me.
They're better questionnaires this time too.
Yeah, yeah, I think those questionnaires definitely streamline it. The other thing I find really interesting are the percentage of jurors that have read about it, the percentage of jurors that have opinions, but then the percentage of jurors that can ignore those opinions and still be fair jurors. That's a 3 subsets.
Mm-hmm.
You've got somewhere between 80 and 90% in those areas of jurors that have heard about it. You've got somewhere around 40 or 50% that say they have an opinion, which I think is pretty interesting that about half have an opinion. But then you only have about 10 to 15% who
Even
say
less.
they can't ignore the opinion. Excuse me?
Even less than that has been
Yeah.
reported. Even less
That
than
say they can't ignore the opinion. So I find, I mean, I'd be very skeptical of having a juror that say they had an opinion and then put them on the jury. That would kind of bother me. But apparently, they've managed to get 10 of them so far, which I think is actually very good. You're right. I think that would be ahead of where I thought they would be.
right. I was saying the over under. What is it? The 14th is it's either the 13th or the 14th. Let me just check my calendar so I can just
Does Vegas giving odds on this? Because they
no.
bet you bet on
Monday
almost
the 14th.
everything.
So Monday, April 14th. That's kind of the over under for me right now on whether or not that's when opening statements start, because that gives them Friday and all of next week to get 6 jurors. I think it's going to happen.
I do too.
I don't know if Judge Canoni is going to say, like, if on Tuesday they get their 16th juror, I don't know if she's just going to say, okay, Wednesday opening statements, or if she kicks it to the following Monday. Maybe they handle some motions. I don't know. But the over under, I would set it, would be April 13th and a half of when they're going to have the opening statements. But what's even more interesting to me than the percentages you just read is comparing them with last trial. 75% of people had heard about it. And now it's higher than 80 to 90. It's almost 85 to 95% of people have heard about it now. So like 10% plus more people have heard about it now. And it has to be considerably more with an opinion. And then opinions can be on things that don't matter. Opinions can be not strong opinions, or opinions can be things that you can get over. But once you get to the confirmed bias, those people are that 5 to 10%, they're struck for cause. So they're already out. It's really the whatever 30% or whatever is left of the people with opinions that are the real difficult ones to get through. Those are the real difficult ones but you have both sides in this case that I think might feel strongly that those opinions might be in their favor. So maybe they want them, but you better be sure if you're going to have somebody that has an opinion on the case be on this jury.
Yeah, same thing with, I don't know. And last time, interestingly, in Massachusetts, the judge picks the foreman, which I think is an interesting concept. Last time she picked a retired police officer, I believe. So who these people are in there somewhere is the one the judge is going to pick as the foreman. You've got to be worried about that if you're a defense lawyer and you're picking your jury as to, are you going to put somebody in there the judge is really going to like as a strong guilty opinion? I don't know. And plus, I'm sure you know this. They have filed a petition in the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
As well. So there's a pending Supreme Court petition, which is not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think
But they're still trying.
Yeah, I think, another thing that's interesting about this, the lawyers are listening to everything. We usually know who the prosecution's going to like. They know who we're going to like. Sometimes there are mystery where you're not sure which side's going to like them, but the judge is also keeping track. The judge is also looking at questionnaires. The judge is also listening to answers. So the judge knows the background and the answers of each of the jurors. So when they pick the foreman, they know the foreman that they're picking, which is a very interesting process to me. I much prefer the jurors go back there and they vote on their own foreman. I would not want judges picking my foreman. Would you?
Not at all. In fact, it kind of hurts the game we play. Is that we sit around before the jury goes out and we we don't bet obviously, but
Yes.
with the prosecutors we sit around and go, okay, who do you think is going to be the foreman and who do you think is going to be the foreman? It makes it much more difficult, I think, to try to guess who the foreman is going to be, because a lot of times the lawyers can really say who's the leader on that panel and who's the one that we think is going to really be the strong voice on that panel. And the judge selecting the foreman changes that dynamic.
Yeah, I don't love it. I don't love it, but
I don't either.
maybe it feels like it affected the first trial, but who really knows, right? Because we weren't there.
Right.
All right. Any other thoughts as we go into week 2 of jury selection for the Karen Reed trial?
No, I think jury selection is going pretty well. Another thing I like is it's going smoothly, which I think is really interesting that they've ironed out all the kinks and how they're going to proceed. So it's been a very smooth process that they've gone through.
Yeah, I agree.
And
All right.
they move the spectators or the outside spectators, they move them further away from the courthouse, so
Somebody
the
sued
jurors
the judge.
can't hear them anymore.
Do you see somebody sued the judge over that?
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
It's all sorts of stuff going on. I mean, we're already over an hour, and it just feels like you could go into a rabbit hole in this case and never come out. But here we are. We're getting close to trial 2. I'm ready for it to start. I don't know about you. So make sure you guys hit the like button. Make sure you give us a review on whatever podcast network you are listening to this on. Leave a comment with your question. Let us know what you think. But until next time, we're out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.